I bought a house in Ohio. But if you ever do the same, remember this. Follow the rules or you won't last a single night. That might sound dramatic, maybe even ridiculous, but I promise you, it isn't a joke. I learned that the hard way, and I wouldn't wish my first week in this place on anyone. When I tell people I bought a house, they usually picture something cozy. A front porch with a swing, maybe a little white fence. They don't imagine a weather-beaten two-story sitting at the end of a lonely road, surrounded by skeletal trees that creak in the wind. They don't imagine windows that seem to stare back at you like eyes, or a roof that sags just enough to look tired. But me, I saw the listing online and I saw the price. Dirt cheap, too cheap. I'd been drowning in rent payments for years, and when this place popped up, I didn't even hesitate. Sure, the photos looked eerie, but a house is a house, right? That's what I told myself. Of course, the listing didn't mention the rules. Neither did the realtor, not until after the papers were signed and I was already holding the keys in my hand. She said them quickly, almost like she was reciting a grocery list. And before I could ask any real questions, she was gone, out the door, engine roaring, tire spitting gravel as she vanished down the road. I didn't take her seriously at first. Who would? A sheet of rules taped to the fridge, written in black marker on yellowed paper. They looked like the kind of quirky instructions an eccentric homeowner might leave behind. Except these weren't about watering plants or adjusting the thermostat. These were warnings, life or death warnings. I didn't believe them then. But now, sitting here in the flickering light of my desk lamp, I write this for anyone who might stumble across the same kind of deal, because the rules are real. And if you break them, you don't survive. The drive to the house was the first thing that told me something wasn't quite right. Ohio has plenty of empty stretches of land, but this particular road felt abandoned. The trees that lined it leaned toward the asphalt as if they were trying to close the path off entirely, their bare branches rattling against one another in the wind. I passed no cars, no joggers, not even a mailbox that wasn't rusted through. The air smelled faintly of damp earth and something metallic, like rain on old copper, though the sky was perfectly clear. When I finally pulled up, the town itself wasn't much to look at. Just a scatter of houses, a corner store, and a diner with a flickering neon sign. The people I saw were polite, too polite, smiles that lingered too long, eyes that didn't blink enough. They greeted me with cheerful hellos, but their voices were tight, like every word cost them something. I remember stopping at the diner on move-in day. The waitress, the thin woman with crow's feet etched into her face, placed my coffee on the counter and asked, "You the one who bought the old Miller house?" Her voice dropped when she said it, like she was talking about something she shouldn't. When I nodded, she just whispered, "Don't forget the rules, no matter what." Then she walked away before I could ask what she meant. The realtor wasn't much better. She smiled wide when I signed the papers, but her eyes kept darting toward the window, as if she was in a hurry to be anywhere but here. The moment the deal was official, she pressed the keys into my palm and nearly ran for her car. I watched her taillights disappear down the road, leaving me alone with my new house. At first glance, it didn't look all that bad. A two-story with peeling paint, a porch sagging under its own weight, and a yard that hadn't been mowed in months. Inside, though, was where I felt it. The air was heavy, like the house was holding its breath. The kitchen looked ordinary enough, except for one thing, a laminated sheet of paper taped to the fridge. The rules. Bold black letters, numbered from 1 to 6, each one stranger than the last. I skimmed them, chuckled nervously, and tossed the idea aside. Some kind of weird joke left behind by the previous owner, I figured. But the longer I stayed inside, the more those rules pressed against the back of my mind. The living room had a boarded-up window in the attic that I couldn't reach. The basement door was locked with a heavy iron padlock, but every so often I thought I heard faint tapping coming from below. and one of the bedrooms carried an odor I couldn't quite place. Not mold, not mildew, something sour and rotten, like meat left out too long. Still, I told myself it was fine. I had my reasons for ignoring the red flags. Years of paying rent had drained me dry, and owning this place, even a crumbling shell of it, was the first chance I had at stability. When you're desperate, you convince yourself of a lot of things. But that laminated sheet on the fridge stayed there. No matter how many times I looked away, it was waiting when I came back. Black letters burned into yellowing paper, whispering promises I didn't believe then. Not yet. The first rule on that list was simple enough. Always lock the front door by 9 p.m. sharp. If someone knocks after that, do not open it, no matter what they say. It felt silly at first. Who even writes something like that? Maybe it was some old superstition, or the last owner had been paranoid about break-ins. Either way, I told myself I wasn't going to let a weird little note dictate how I lived in my own house. Still, that first night, curiosity got the better of me. I checked the old grandfather clock in the living room as the hands slid toward 9. With a little grin, I decided to play along. At 8:59, I turned the lock on the front door. The deadbolt clicked into place. For a moment, I actually laughed at myself. See, I thought, no ghosts, no monsters, just me in my new home. But at 9:15, the knocking started. It wasn't loud. Just 3 soft taps, like the knuckles of a child, against the wood. I froze where I stood, the sound echoing in the quiet house. A small voice followed. "Excuse me, can you help me?" It was a boy's voice, thin, trembling, maybe 7 or 8 years old. My stomach twisted. What kid would be outside alone this late? I moved closer, my hand hovering over the lock. But then the rule came back to me. Do not open it, no matter what they say. The knocking came again, a little louder this time. "Please, I lost my dog. He ran into your yard." The words tugged at me. Every part of me wanted to open the door, but something in that voice was off. It was too rehearsed. The syllables landed flat, like someone reading from a script. Against my better judgment, I leaned down and peered through the peephole. What I saw made my blood turn cold. The shape on my porch was too tall, its shoulders hunched low, knees bent awkwardly, like it was crouching just to fit into the boy's voice. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and though the porch light flickered weakly, I could see its mouth moving. The words came out in the same child's tone. "Please, open the door." I stumbled back, heart hammering, one hand clamped over my mouth to keep from making a sound. The knocking continued for several minutes, each one weaker than the last, until finally the night fell silent again. I didn't sleep at all after that. That was the moment I stopped laughing at the rules. The second rule on that list was even stranger than the first. Never look directly into the mirrors after midnight. Cover them if possible. That one made me laugh. What kind of haunted house cliché was this? Mirrors. Really? I'd seen enough movies to know how silly it sounded. Still, after what happened at the door, I wasn't in the mood to tempt fate. I grabbed a couple of old sheets from a moving box and draped them over the largest mirrors, the one above the bathroom sink, and the long one in the upstairs hallway. But the living room mirror was too heavy and too wide. It was bolted into the wall, a relic from some past renovation. I told myself it would be fine, that nothing would happen, and went about unpacking. That night, the house was unusually quiet. Even the trees outside seemed still, the usual scratching of their branches against the siding absent. I tried to distract myself with an old book I'd brought along, glancing at the grandfather clock as the hands crept past midnight. At 12:30, I got up to grab a glass of water. That's when I saw it. The mirror in the living room caught me at the corner of my vision. Normally, reflections don't pull your attention, you expect them, but something about the angle made me stop. I turned my head and looked directly into it. My reflection was there, but it wasn't quite right. For one, it was still smiling, even though I wasn't. My lips were pressed in a flat line, but in the glass, my face stretched into a crooked grin. Worse, when I lifted my hand to test it, the reflection hesitated, just half a second behind me. That shouldn't happen. Mirrors don't lag. I stepped closer, heart pounding, breath fogging the glass. The reflection leaned in too, eyes glittering with something sharp, something eager. And then it moved. Not me. It. I froze as my reflection lifted its hand slowly, deliberately, and tapped the other side of the glass. A hollow tick echoed in the room. My skin crawled, every instinct screaming at me to get away. I grabbed one of the sheets from the hallway and flung it over the mirror, nearly tripping over myself in the process. The fabric clung to the frame, mercifully blocking its surface. The room fell silent again, but my chest wouldn't stop heaving. That night, I covered every reflective surface I could find, even the ones I'd missed. Picture frames, the black screen of the TV, anything that might throw back my face. It sounds ridiculous, I know, but ever since then, I don't trust mirrors. Not in this house. Not after I saw mine smile back at me. The third rule on that list was the one that got under my skin the most. Do not enter the basement. If you hear noises from there, ignore them. It was simple, but there was something about the wording, especially that last part, that made me uneasy. Ignore them. Not just don't go down there, but pretend you didn't hear anything at all. Whoever wrote these rules clearly expected noises, and they expected me to be tempted by them. For the first couple nights, the basement was silent. I let myself believe the rule was more of a precaution, maybe to keep me from stumbling into some old wiring or collapsing steps. The house was old. I wouldn't be surprised if the foundation was unstable. That's what I told myself. But on the fourth night, just past 1 a.m, I heard it. At first, it was faint scratching, like nails raking against wood, buried beneath my feet. I froze in the hallway, holding my breath. It was rhythmic, steady, like something alive was clawing at the underside of the floor. I told myself it was rats. Old houses had them. Rats in the walls, raccoons in the crawl spaces. Nothing to worry about. Then the scratching stopped. What followed wasn't the scurrying of animals. It was the sound of someone crying. A low, muffled sob echoed up from the basement door at the end of the hall. It wasn't just generic weeping, either. It sounded familiar. My stomach knotted as I realized why. It sounded almost exactly like my sister. Her voice had that same quiver, that same broken rhythm she used to have when she cried as a kid. I hadn't spoken to her in months, but in that moment it was like she was right there, trapped below the floorboards. I started walking. I didn't even realize it until I was halfway down the hallway. Bare feet pressing against cold wood, every creak of the floorboard sounding like a gunshot in the silence. My hand hovered just inches from the basement doorknob before another thought cut through the haze. Rule number 1, never acknowledge someone at the door if you don't hear them knock. That rule had already saved me once, and I realized these weren't arbitrary instructions. They weren't superstitions, they were protection. If the first rule had kept me safe, then breaking the third would mean disaster. My hand pulled back, trembling, but the crying didn't stop. It grew louder, clearer, turning into pleas. Please. Please let me out. It's so dark down here. I bit my lip hard enough to taste iron. My sister's voice again, perfect in every inflection. Whoever or whatever was down there knew exactly what would tempt me. I forced myself to whisper, "You're not real." That's when everything went silent. I thought maybe it was over, until I leaned forward, pressing my ear against the wood of the basement door. At first, there was only my own heartbeat. Then, as if waiting for me to get close enough, a whisper slid through the other side. "I know you hear me." I stumbled back, nearly falling. My chest tightened, every instinct telling me to run, to flee the house, but my legs refused to move. That was when I understood. The rules weren't warnings about the house being unsafe. They were warnings about the house being inhabited. By what, I couldn't say. But I knew one thing for certain. Those rules weren't suggestions. They were the only reason I was still alive. The first 3 rules had already shaken me, but the 4th was the one that made me question if I could keep this job at all. If you wake up at 3:33 a.m. and someone is standing at the foot of your bed, do not acknowledge them. Close your eyes until they leave. The wording alone was enough to leave me unsettled. I could deal with locks on doors, with mirrors covered, even with ignoring sounds that called to me from the basement. But this rule wasn't about the house. This was personal. It meant that whatever lived here wasn't confined to the dark hallways or shadowy corners. It could come into the one place I should have felt safe. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I lay in the bed, staring at the ceiling, watching the slow red creep of the digital clock beside me. Midnight passed, then 1, then 2. Every creak of the house sounded louder. Every brush of wind against the window made my chest tighten. By 3 o'clock, my eyes were heavy. I told myself the rule was just a scare tactic, a way to keep me paranoid enough to respect the others. I told myself that, but exhaustion had other plans. I drifted. When I opened my eyes again, the clock read 3:33, and someone was standing at the foot of my bed. I froze. The figure wasn't moving, wasn't breathing, at least not that I could hear. Just a silhouette against the faint glow of the hallway light that spilled through the cracked bedroom door. It was tall, too tall, its head nearly brushing the ceiling. For one dizzy, nauseating second, instinct screamed at me to scream back, to bolt upright and run. But the rule cut through the fog of panic like a blade. Do not acknowledge them. Close your eyes until they leave. So I did. I shut my eyes tight enough that stars burst against the darkness. My chest heaved in shallow, silent breaths. I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears, each beat dragging out the seconds into eternities. And then the bedsheets shifted. It was subtle at first, the faintest tug at the corner near my feet. But it grew heavier, like weight pressing down, sinking into the mattress. Something was climbing closer. A rush of hot, damp air brushed against my ear. I almost broke then. My lips parted, my throat tightening with the scream that clawed to get out. But I clamped my jaw shut and held on. My only weapon was obedience. The rules had kept me alive this long, and I couldn't betray them now. The breathing lingered, slow and deliberate, so close it felt like the thing's face was inches from mine. I gripped the sheets in both fists, knuckles aching, praying for it to end. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the weight lifted. The mattress eased back into place, the air in the room settled, and the sound faded. I waited, 10 seconds, 20, maybe a full minute, before daring to crack my eyes open. The clock read 3:37. The doorway was empty. The room was mine again. I should have felt relief. But what settled in my chest instead was something heavier, colder. Because now I understood the truth behind these rules. They weren't just about keeping me safe. They were about teaching me how to endure the impossible, how to sit silently through the presence of things that should not exist. And I wasn't sure how many more nights I could survive that. The first 4 rules had been about surviving through stillness, locking doors, closing eyes, resisting the urge to act. Rule 5 was the first that demanded something of me. Every Friday night, leave a glass of water outside your back door before bed. Don't check until morning. It sounded absurd. A glass of water. Out of all the terrifying warnings about things in mirrors, figures at my bed, voices in the basement, this one felt laughable. At first, I figured it was a relic of superstition, some old wives' tale about warding off bad spirits. The kind of thing you'd read in a folk magic pamphlet at a roadside store. That Friday night came faster than I expected. The week had been heavy enough that by the time I sat down at the kitchen table, I barely remembered the list of rules taped to my fridge. I poured myself a drink, stared at the laminate instructions, and scoffed. My eyelids were heavy, my body sore. The thought of filling another glass and trudging out into the cold night air felt ridiculous, so I didn't. I went to bed instead. I should have known better. At 2 a.m., the sound started. It was faint at first, a low dragging scrape against the back door. I thought it might be a raccoon or some other animal nosing around. But then it came again, louder, longer, nails on wood. The scrape turned to scratching, frantic and sharp, as if claws were tearing at the frame. I sat up in bed, frozen, listening. The sound didn't stop. It circled the door, impatient, testing. Once, twice, again. Like whatever was out there was trying to find a way in. The rules burned in my memory then, their words slicing through the fog of fear. Leave a glass of water outside your back door. Don't check until morning. My chest tightened. I hadn't done it. I wanted to run downstairs, open the door, throw something out, anything. But I knew better now. Breaking one part of the rules was bad enough. Breaking two in one night could be fatal. So I sat there in the dark, fists clenched in the sheets, listening to the scratching and the low, guttural sound that rose from behind the door. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't even close. It was patient, purposeful, almost waiting. The noise lasted for over an hour before it stopped. The silence that followed was worse. My imagination filled in the gaps. Something crouching just beyond the door. Still there, waiting for me to slip. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. When dawn finally broke, I gathered the courage to step downstairs. The sight made my stomach drop. The wood of the back door was gouged, deep claw marks carved into it like someone had dragged 5 rusted blades across the surface over and over again. The paint had splintered, chunks of wood curling at the edges. Whatever it had been, it was strong enough to tear the frame apart if it had wanted to. As I stood there, staring at the damage, I heard a voice from the yard. "Forgot the water, didn't you?" It was my neighbor, an older man, one I'd seen trimming his hedges before, but never spoken to. He stood at the fence, leaning casually on it, watching me with an expression that was too knowing. I didn't answer. He didn't need me to. That night, I poured the glass of water. My hands trembled as I set it down outside the door, and I didn't forget again. Rule 6 was the one I scoffed at the most when I first read it. If the phone rings between 2:15 and 2:30 a.m., do not answer, even if it's your own number. I'd thought, what kind of haunted house cliché is this? The landline hadn't even rung once since I moved in, and my cell service was spotty at best. It seemed like another one of those arbitrary warnings, the kind people make up to frighten newcomers. But that was before I learned what happens when you break it. It was a Tuesday night, or technically Wednesday morning. I'd been lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The events of the past few nights kept replaying in my mind. The figure at the foot of the bed, the scraping at the back door, the claw marks that hadn't faded from the wood. Every creak of the house made me tense. At exactly 2:20 a.m., the phone rang. Not my cell. The old landline mounted on the kitchen wall. Its shrill, mechanical sound tore through the silence like a blade. I jolted upright, heart hammering. The rules immediately surfaced in my mind. Don't answer. Don't answer. Don't answer. But the thing is, fear plays tricks on you. When the rules tell you not to act, every part of your mind wants to do the opposite. The longer the phone rang, the more unbearable it became. It was like the sound was pulling me down the hall, demanding I'd pick up. I tried to ignore it. I covered my ears, paced the room, even whispered out loud, "It'll stop, it'll stop, it'll stop." But it didn't. The ring went on, and when I finally glanced at the caller ID from across the hall, my blood froze. The glowing green display read, "My number." It was my own number. My breath came shallow. My stomach dropped. Every instinct screamed at me to stay away. But the longer I stared, the more a twisted kind of curiosity took over. What if it's a mistake? What if it's something important? What if it's me? Against everything I'd learned so far, I lifted the receiver. The line clicked. For a moment, all I heard was static, faint and hissing. Then, a voice. My voice. "You shouldn't be here." It was soft, almost tender, like a warning whispered in the dark. I felt the words settle into my bones. Before I could respond, the tone of the voice shifted. The whisper turned into a wet, guttural scream. It wasn't just sound. It was pressure, a force that rattled the walls and drilled into my skull. My free hand clamped over my ear, but it didn't help. The scream wasn't coming through the receiver anymore. It was inside the house. The lights overhead flickered violently. The air grew heavy, thick, almost unbreathable. Every shadow stretched and twisted, bending at impossible angles, as if the house itself was convulsing. I dropped the phone. It swung on its cord, slamming against the wall. The voice didn't stop. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet, whispering apologies to no one. My chest ached. My pulse thudded in my ears. I pressed my palms against my eyes and begged for it to end. And then, silence. The line went dead. The light steadied. The air eased, though it still carried the faint scent of ozone, sharp and unnatural. When I dared to look at the phone again, the display was blank. But the receiver, dangling, still swayed gently, as if someone had just let go. That was the first rule I broke, and the house made sure I understood. I should have known the house wasn't done with me. The night after I broke Rule 6, the atmosphere changed. The walls seemed to breathe heavier. Every step I took echoed longer than it should have, like the house itself was waiting, listening, for me to slip again. And that night, everything collided. Every rule, every warning, all at once. It started just after 9 o'clock. I was sitting at the kitchen table, trying to steady my nerves with lukewarm coffee, when the pounding began. 3 knocks. Slow. Deliberate. They rattled the front door, loud enough to shake the picture frames on the walls. I froze, mug halfway to my lips. I didn't need to look at the clock to know the time. The rules had been clear. After 9 p.m., no one on the other side of the door is real. The knocking grew louder, more impatient. Then came a voice, muffled through the wood but sharp enough to cut straight through me. Let me in. It wasn't angry. It wasn't pleading. It was calm. Too calm. I held my breath, squeezing the mug so hard I thought it might shatter. I didn't answer. I didn't move. The pounding stopped. I thought that was it. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something worse. The living room mirror, one I could have sworn I'd covered earlier, was bare. Its sheet lay crumpled on the floor, as if peeled away by invisible hands. And the reflection inside, it wasn't mine. At first glance, it looked like me standing in the frame. But the longer I stared, the more wrong it became. Its head tilted too far. Its lips stretched in a smile I wasn't making. The eyes blinked half a second slower than mine, like they weren't quite synced. And then it moved. Not me, it. My reflection stepped forward, pressing its palm against the glass. I stumbled backward, heart slamming against my ribs. The rules screamed in my head. Keep the mirrors covered. I lunged, grabbing the fallen sheet, hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. Just as the reflection's grin widened, just as its fingers started to push through, I yanked the cover back over. The air in the room lightened, but my chest was still tight, my pulse racing. I barely had a moment to breathe before the clock betrayed me again. 3:33 a.m. I didn't even need to check. I could feel it. The weight in the room grew heavier, suffocating. The air thinned, and when I dared to crack my eyes open, I saw it. The figure, the same one I'd seen before, standing at the foot of the bed. Only this time, it wasn't across the room. It was closer. So close. Its outline brushed against the mattress. My instincts screamed to look, to fight, to do something, anything. But the rule echoed in my head. When it comes, keep your eyes closed. Don't move. So I forced them shut, muscles trembling, tears burning at the corners. I felt the weight shift on the bed. The sheets pulled tight against my legs. Something icy grazed my ankle. Slowly, carefully, it began climbing. One knee, then another. The mattress dipped. My throat locked. Every nerve screamed at me to open my eyes to see what was happening, but I didn't. I clamped my lids shut and whispered over and over, "Don't move, don't move, don't move." The thing leaned closer. Its breath, if you could call it that, was cold and damp, pressing against my cheek. The house seemed to hold its breath with me. Then, salvation, the phone rang. That horrible, shrill ring from the kitchen. The sound tore through the silence, jarring enough that the pressure on the bed vanished. The weight lifted. The sheets fell slack, but the phone didn't stop. I didn't have to check the caller ID. I already knew. When I finally forced myself to glance, I saw the glow from across the hall. My number, again. The ringing grew louder, almost frantic. Then the static started, not from the receiver, but from the air itself. The voice followed, "Come downstairs." This time it wasn't a whisper. It was a command. A voice that rattled the windows, that shook the air from my lungs. And from beneath the floorboards, I heard it. Something answering back. A low, hungry chorus of whispers rising from the basement. The basement door trembled, the old wood groaning, as if something on the other side was desperate to break through. The rules spiraled in my head, a blur of warnings and commands. Don't answer the door. Cover the mirrors. Don't open your eyes. Ignore the phone. Never go to the basement. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. So I did the only thing I could. I spoke them out loud. Every rule, one by one. My voice shook, breaking, but I forced each word out, like a prayer. The knocking stopped. The phone went dead. The whispers sank back into the floor. The house groaned, angry, wounded, but it quieted. And when the first pale light of dawn slipped through the blinds, I was still alive. Shaken, exhausted, but alive, for now. When dawn finally came, it didn't feel like relief. The sunlight crawled across the floorboards, like something fragile, too weak to chase away the night I had just endured. I sat there on the edge of the bed, trembling, staring at the walls as if they might pulse again, listening for sounds I prayed wouldn't return. The house was quiet, but it wasn't peace. It was the quiet of a predator after it's eaten. I tried to tell myself I had made it, that surviving until morning meant something. But the thought only made the silence heavier, because I knew now the rules weren't guidelines. They weren't even warnings. They were binding. Every line etched into that old paper was a chain around my neck, pulling tighter with every night I stayed. And I had felt the punishment for breaking them. This place didn't forgive. It only watched, and it waited. When I finally stumbled outside for air, the world felt too bright, too normal. Birds were singing, the wind carried the smell of damp grass, and for a second, I almost believed I had imagined everything.